Thank you for joining us today for another episode of Overpowering Emotions. We are excited to introduce special guest Brenda Wollenberg, a specialist in natural wellness programs for children, teens, and adults. Over the past 5 years, she has developed proficiency in helping clients understand the science of their genetics and in identifying patterns of behavior that might affect their gene expression. She has had the privilege of being featured on TV and podcasts. Her articles have been published in various print media, and she is the author of Overweight Kids in a Toothpick World and Eat, Sleep, Move for Your Genetic Body Type. As someone who practices what she believes, Brenda is not just about helping you be the best version of yourself. She is about helping you understand how to get there.
Well, hello, Brenda. Thank you so much for joining us on the show today.
You're very welcome. Really good to be here. Thanks. Yeah.
Why don't we start by having you introduce yourself to us?
Sure. So I'm many things. I've worn many hats, okay? Started as a social worker, worked in that field for almost a decade. Did actually a little stint in co-leading of a faith community. And then now, in the last 20 years, have been a holistic nutritionist. And then just the last 5 years, and what got our conversation kind of going was I've been doing a lot more study and evaluation in looking at analyzing and interpreting raw genetic data. So I love being able to personalize an approach to wellness, period. We've done that the whole 20 years. But this last 5 with the new research that's coming out, I've been able to do that a little bit more. And it helps people get well physically and emotionally. And I just see some real shifts. I know you're seeing this year is resilience and, trying to do that. And so it's been really fun to see the ways that you can help teens, children, and their parents have increased resilience with some lifestyle changes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess, there's so much going on. And yes, you're right. This topic, I'm on this journey of resilience right now. So I guess I'm just curious in what got you interested in fostering resilience in children and teens. And I know you're doing some work in epigenetics. So maybe you can just, touch on that, explain that term and
Sure.
Then we can go in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I think how I got interested in fostering this, and I think a lot of, maybe I'm being generalizations here, but a lot of times people end up in a helping profession, kind of coming out of situations that they are exploring some of their, responses in those areas. And I think probably subconsciously it started just in my family of origin. Mom, dad, 6 kids, 4 of whom were adopted. And then my parents were foster parents. And so we also, over the years I was growing up, probably had 20 plus foster children through our home at different times. And in hindsight, I think I looked back and I went, a lot of us handled different things very differently there. Whether we were looking at challenges in the school environment or around us in our, neighborhood, how we handled food, food hoarding patterns, food hiding patterns, food restricting patterns. There was a lot of differences in the way that we handled adversity. And I think it just made me start pondering. And then I spent 8 months in a program here, I know in Canada as well. I think it's still around. It's called Canada World Youth, and it was an exchange program. I ended up in Ivory Coast in West Africa, along with another contingent of Canadians. And I have kept a journal. I still have it to this day. And looking at it, and a lot of self-exploration, but also like, here we're in this little tiny village. I ended up in the social work group. We were building a community center. And why are all of us having such different reactions to, no running water, very different food supply, sleeping in tents? Like, we're handling adversity in very different ways. Everything from memorizing all the lyrics to every Rolling Stone song ever known to, just becoming withdrawn. And so it's very interesting. I think that would be the kind of some of the things that moved me into social work, would be examining different ways to do that. And then lastly, I think the last thing was I really loved all my years in actual social work practice, but I was the social worker for a program in the Lower Mainland here in BC called the Intensive Childcare Resource. And so it was an amalgamation of Attorney General's Department, at that time Family and Children Services it was called, education and mental health, and it was specifically set up as a contained unit to work with children who are falling between the cracks with all of those different organizations. And we were trained in using Jesna's inventory. We looked very specifically at the different ways the adolescents were describing themselves and their relationship to the world. And me and the childcare workers, any psychiatrists or psychologists that were involved, designed a very specific plan tailored for that child to help them become more behaviorally advanced and more emotionally healthy, and to be able to deal with the world in a better way. So that kind of sealed the whole deal around, oh my goodness, this cannot be one size fits all. We've got to have different tools that we can use to help children, ourselves, our families, be able to adapt and respond in better ways. So yeah, that was much of a nutshell story, but that's how it came about.
Well, and I'm glad that you brought that up, because I think that cookie cutter approach is so problematic, and it's used often in so many different ways. I mean, I could just go on a soapbox on all of that. So I guess, you kind of talked a little bit about that moment where you realized, we need to really individualize these types of things, because what could happen, how could some of those things that could work for one person maybe not work for somebody else? I actually see this with neurodivergence when we're talking about behavior activation, and you got to get up and exercise if you're feeling depressed, but it can actually make their exhaustion worse. So I don't know if you have examples of that.
Yeah, I will take it back to kind of wellness, simple wellness practice like food, for example. I am a nutritionist now, so you're going to get food coming out the overflow here. But one of the things that I see, and actually even at the time when we developed the ICCR, even though I wasn't a nutritionist then, I had already got healthy by working with some health practitioners who really emphasized diet. So we hired a cook, a really good cook, and we made sure, and I was going to say I lobbied long and hard, but I didn't get pushback. The childcare workers were super happy not to have kids, ingesting tons of refined grains and sugar every day. So as a baseline, we did that. What I know now is that I would have adapted that and prioritized personalization even more, because some kids, for example, some kids and adults, some people need a much higher ratio of protein than others do, as protein is where the amino acids break down from, which helps create all the different kind of neurotransmissions and transmitters that we have. So there are some kids who should have been on much higher amounts of protein. I would have, poor fat has gotten so vilified over the years, but we actually have certain genes. Well, I'll step into epigenetics in a minute, but certain genes that have us require a much higher saturated fat intake than, say, somebody else does. I mean, I'm talking from 22 grams a day to 50 grams a day. That's a significant difference. And again, having to do with mood, having to do with neurotransmission, having to do with cellular membrane, so many things that when you are giving children and adults the right amount of that, their ability even, for example, to make dopamine is much better, or to produce serotonin, coming again from amino acids. So you could play around with those diets. We know that no one that I've ever met in my whole practice does very well mood-wise, energy-wise, etc., on a large amount of refined grains and sugars. We just, that's not something that our gut has even adapted to in time. But I didn't realize that, there's all these nuances in the fats and proteins that can make a big difference. And I think what happens then is you're asking someone, you mentioned different types of stress management tools, for example, that work better with some people than others. Well, even asking someone to put a stress management tool in place when their dopamine levels are very low, or when they haven't had enough of a certain nutrient and they're not getting the cofactors like folate, for example, or B6 that they happen to need to even make that neurotransmitter. You could give a plethora of, stress management tools to someone and then really have a difficult time in choosing one of them or following through on one of them. So I think that's the biggest thing I've seen is, let's start with nutrition. Let's get nutrients, amino acids, vitamins, minerals, fats, right amount of carbs in there. And then people, children, adults can better choose a tool. They have the energy and the resources to do that,
Well, that's major. And I know that there's a couple other ones that we're going to be talking about as well. But on that nutrient front and the nutrition, how would one know? Is it just experimenting? How would you know, how much like a higher protein versus higher complex carb or
Yeah. So there's two primary ways. There's the way that I have used the last 20 years when the human genome, yes, was mapped, but no one had, very few people had the thousands of dollars that would be required to, get your genetics tested. So that is something that's been used for thousands and thousands of years in things like traditional Chinese medicine and Ayurvedic medicine. And it's simply the recognition that bodies are different and that you can usually tell with a simple survey. So for almost 30 years now, I've been using a metabolic typing survey. It was actually one that was developed in part by an American nutritionist by the name of Anne-Louise Gittleman. And it's just a little survey I give all my clients, whether they have genetics done or not, just answer this 4-page survey. And it answers things like, how you respond to how you feel. Do you feel sleepy after you have carbohydrates? Do you feel satisfied after you have? So it's basically, when you're saying trial and error, that's what it is, but it's giving them a little simple tool to be able to go, oh, that's right. Like, I'm always starving when I have that for breakfast. When I have eggs for breakfast, yeah, I can go all day. So that survey, super helpful. And so that's what I have used. And then I know if someone needs to have a little more protein and then probably a little more fat, or they do better if they have a higher carbohydrate basis. With the advent of now epigenetics, epi simply meaning, it's a Greek or Latin word for above, and it just means we have the ability to go above our genetics. We're not at the whim of our genetics. So if we have something that is a challenging dopamine production, serotonin production, whatever, there are some lifestyle practices I can probably do. There are some dietary changes I could make. There's some extra sleep I could get that could do this. But the genetics is very specific. When I said like 22 grams to 40 to 50 grams saturated fat, that's actually pulled out of genetics. The body typing is looser, but it's still a great way to do it. And that can be easily done with, I adapted that intake form for children and teens, and so we can use that at all ages. And it gives parents and kids a starting point to be able to say, hey, you know what? Remember that survey you did? Remember you told me you feel better when you have this. So instead of, I'm not going to brand name a cereal, but instead of this sugar-coated whatever, remember when you did 2 eggs and you had a piece of bacon, that you felt you could focus more in school and you didn't respond as kind of explosively when this situation happened. So you can start pairing behaviors and responses with, remember when we did this? Remember when you got to bed at 8? Remember we didn't have screens for an hour before bed? So you slept better because it was this or that. So yeah, that's how you can tell as a survey or the full-blown genetics. Yeah.
Okay, that's great. And those surveys, are they readily available or
people can just email me? I give that one just out free. It's just
amazing. Yeah. And I'll have your contact in the show notes as well. So we've kind of talked a little bit about diet, and then you started mentioning sleep. Why don't we talk about sleep a little bit?
My 3 cornerstone stools: diet, sleep, and stress management. Okay, so sleep, it's the same thing where everyone is very different on the length that they need. Okay, although I would venture to guess, even though the entrepreneurs I work with try to tell me that they're entrepreneur gurus, get by on 4 hours of sleep a night, and they do magnificently, I say, I'm not so sure. That kind of might be taking a long-term toll on them, okay? But certainly variety of sleep, as far as length of it, matters. We need to be able to get through all of the different stages of sleep, sufficient times in a night to be rested the next day, have the kind of brain cleaning, house cleaning that goes on, etc. But the other thing is that depending on people's makeup, sometimes people will have a harder time falling asleep. Sometimes people will fall asleep great, but they will wake up in the night and have trouble falling back to sleep. And sometimes people will wake up too early. They would rather not wake up at 5. They'd like to sleep for an extra hour. And again, there's a lot of factors that impact those, but often it has to do with the amino acids. So, GABA being something that can be in deficiency if we're having trouble falling asleep, especially if the brain is cycling and thinking and solving all of our problems, or maybe even all the problems of the world. That can be something that can be low. Oftentimes waking up at night and getting it back can be a factor with cortisol, can be a factor with being stuck in fight or flight. Again, these are possibilities. I'm not diagnosing. Nutritionists don't diagnose or treat. And then the third one, it can often be a serotonin factor, that waking up early in the morning. So if I'm seeing patterns in that with, my clients, if we bump up this food, okay, let's see if that will help a bit. Let's try this type of a stress management approach. It might work, a certain type of breathing pattern or whatever before go to bed. And then I think the other really huge part with sleep, especially with kiddos, is that it has to do with a lot of circadian rhythm aspects. So when we are driven to school, we didn't get to walk to school, wasn't a lot of sun on our face, we're just right in artificial light, we often don't even get the message that we're supposed to wake up. And so, as much as you can get your kids out into the deck, maybe for their breakfast, I know you're in Calgary, it might be a little cold still, but getting out there so there's that sun on their faces for even 10 minutes. I live in Vancouver, we got to be out there a little bit longer, 20, 30 minutes because of the overcast. But that can go a long way to telling, okay, wake up, cortisol needs to be high now, and get you setting in a process so that as it comes time for the end of the day, you're lowering the lights in your house, you're getting the kiddos off of TV and off screen at least an hour before bed. You've got the right types of light then coming in, and it's often much easier to fall asleep. So, my children were apparently the only children in the universe who were not allowed to have their phones in their bedrooms at night. They used to plug them in and charge out in the other main room. But yeah, that circadian rhythm, if you can help your kiddos or yourself reset that goes a long way to sounder sleep. And then easier able to be more resilient the next day.
Yeah. And screens is a big one for sure. We only have one screen in our house, and it's in a basement far away from bedrooms. So, which is good. And the other thing that's fascinating, actually, I'm looking into sleep more. Was always one of those people who, I do fantastic on 4 hours sleep. I feel terrible if I get more, but I'm seeing with age, like it really does wear me out. And I'm seeing an acupuncturist. I'm someone who wakes up, so I can fall asleep and stay asleep, but I wake up between 3:30 and 4 every day. And this acupuncturist is talking about the times that we wake up can be correlated, and depending on when we go to bed, with different body parts and functions. Yeah. So for that, I think it was lungs. She was saying lungs and kidney, and but then looking at the psychological piece as well. So it's fascinating just how it's all affected.
I'm glad you mentioned that. I didn't want to get too weird, but I was going to say, depending upon the time you wake up, could have to do with liver, could have to do with whatever. So I exactly agree with that. Yeah.
It's so fascinating, which then ties into the stress management. And I think you said that was your third sort of focus. Yeah. So let's talk about that one.
So, you talked about just how different, children are neurodivergent, different aspects of mental health functioning, all different kinds of things that we're dealing with means that we might need different tools to be able to function well, to be able to feel at calm, those kind of things. And there's a lot of discussion around the sympathetic nervous system, the parasympathetic nervous system, how it can be easier for some people to stay stuck, say, in the sympathetic fight or flight, freeze, fawn mode, and have more difficulty with relaxing and recuperative digest, that kind of a mode. And I used to just think it was personality. Like I'm type A, and that was me, trouble falling asleep after I woke up in the night, that kind of thing. And to actually find out that, yes, that can be a part of it. We do have a personality that we have, but that there is actually a specific gene that typically helps with the negative feedback on the HPA axis, so hypothalamus, pituitary, adrenal. Each strips down hormones to activate the adrenal gland's production of cortisol. And then you can envision a little, arrows going back to those three organs saying, thank you, we have enough cortisol, we're good for the day. You can begin to minimize production because you want to fall asleep tonight. And it's like the HPA axis just puts their hands over their ears and just goes, we're not listening. And it's one specific gene so that you actually do not get the negative feedback message to shut that down. And I have that variant, homozygous, so got it from both my folks. And it was like life-changing when I discovered that 5 years ago. I thought, oh, well, that's really good to know. We should have known that like 30 years ago, okay? Because there was something you can do with it. That's why all my yoga and centered prayer and meditation and deep breathing worked. But I just a joke, it'd be like I sneezed, I'd be back in sympathetic mode again. I'm like, what the heck? And it's because of that HPA axis. So if people have that genetics, then they need to take a particular supplement that actually resets that, so that then all their management tools, their stress tools can actually have an effect. And I think about, kids I've worked with as a social worker, clients I've had and as a nutritionist, and kind of some just going like, come on, let's just get this. We can do this. Here we go. Breathe. And it's like, it works, but only for a time. And so that is an example of where, a tool would need to be a supplement tool. But even with things like dopamine production, for example, helping kiddos understand that a lot of times if they're not making enough dopamine, there can be a lot of all different types of addictive types of behavior, sugar, exercise, even later on, drug and alcohol use, online shopping, risky sexual behavior, all kinds of patterns of behavior that are because of an insufficiency in dopamine. So we need to eat more animal protein that provides the tyrosine that actually is the amino acid. We may need to supplement with some of that, some of the zinc, B6 cofactors that help with that. Instead of sitting and doing meditative breathing, you probably should be doing a minute of jumping jacks or skipping, because that has the ability to elevate dopamine for a couple of hours at least. So what we're trying to get a kiddo to calm down, and that's not really what's needed. Like you said, there is something else that we need to do to help activate this particular pathway that will then enable them to not be focused on something else, because they'll be able to be calm and able to do this. So yeah, that's a couple of examples of some of the stress management ones.
Well, and already I'm sure, I am thinking this, so I know listeners will be too, just like, oh my gosh, so many things that we don't necessarily think about. We hear just breathe and sit and relax. And I'm always telling, that's not the best anyways, when we're looking at resilience and anxiety most of the time. So again, with this stuff, would it be another sort of assessment tool that they'd be looking at, or how would they?
Yeah, for the genetics, right now, I currently have people do the 23andMe test, or many times, lots of times people have already done it. They wanted to find their long lost relative in, I don't know, Belgium or something, Right. So they actually already have the raw data on their back office. They just need to download it, or currently 23andMe has had some breaches of security, apparently. So they're having you contact them and get it, which is fine. And so once you have that raw data, it's just a string of numbers, RS numbers, FTO, RS, such and such. And I take that, and there's 2 software programs that I'm trained in using. I just upload that to it and utilize that. In the very near future, like in the next couple of weeks, I may be able, because some people are understandably concerned about getting their data to some of these big corporations. The next couple of weeks, looks like I'm going to be able to use a smaller lab that will not keep your data. They don't sell it to pharmaceutical companies, that kind of thing. So there is some things in the works for people that are concerned. But it's a very simple process. You get it done through a spit test, or this new lab will be a swab, which is a bit easier for kiddos. And then, I just fire it through my software and get to have fun helping you figure out some of these missing pieces of the puzzle.
That's amazing. And I'm even thinking of families with children with ADHD, for example. I mean, it's all the dopamine and those risky behaviors you're talking about, it, like it just all fits within that spectrum.
Yeah.
I have a couple of questions still. So how come those three? How come sleep, nutrition, and stress management specifically? Because there's probably so many that we could focus on. So why those three?
Almost the whole time I've been a nutritionist, I've operated with what's called my made up balance acronym, BALANCE. So B stood for body type. You had to be personalized. A was for attitude, really looking at some of my social work hat components. L was for laughter and play, for stress management. A was for activity, for exercise. N for good night's sleep. C for clean water, and E for eating for health. That has been those BALANCE, those 7 have been the roots of my combined kind of social work, nutrition, pastoral practice. The 3 that I mentioned, I find are the most important because they together combine to give a client energy. And it's very hard to be motivated to make changes, to be able to use tools, to be able to get out the door, even to exercise, if you don't have enough energy. And if I can give someone what I call their optimal fuel mix, and I can get them to bed early enough at night, and even 1 or 2 super simple stress management tools, the world is their oyster. It's like it just provides the foundation that is needed to then grow, you're going to get me off on a social platform here, but, we talk about different parts of the world, different economic, areas, different geographic areas. And we want everybody to become enlightened, and we want everybody to become self-actualized and more kind and more justice-oriented. And I'm like, seriously? If you are working 3 jobs to put food on the table, and you've got this happening and you've got this happening, like, other things aren't as easy to have happen. So if we can get people eating well, being nourished, having enough sleep, that just enables them to do a lot of other things that are a part of healthy growing. So yeah, those are my 3 stools, and I'm right on the stool and I'm sticking by them.
Well, yeah, and it's true. And even sleep, I always tell for sure sleep. Like if your kiddo doesn't have enough sleep, it doesn't matter what behavior plan, it doesn't matter what resilience or strategies, anything that we do, nothing is going to work. We need that's a priority for sure. And yeah, nutrition and the stress management comes in there. So knowing that this is mostly people who are working with or parenting children and teens, and maybe they don't want to get this DNA testing or anything like that, are there specific tools that teachers or parents or other professionals could use to help support, building resilience? And
yeah, absolutely. For $4, I don't. This is not meant to be a self-promotion, but $4.97. The book I wrote last year, you can download it. It has that survey in it. It goes through all of those 7 steps that you can begin to put into place with these foods. Eat real food as close as possible to its original form. Don't become a food fanatic. I talk about the concept of sometimes food. Like, hello, we have 5 children. Do you think I did not ever have any birthday parties or any celebrations? We love to party. So how can you incorporate that as a healthy part of this? How can you incorporate sleep hygiene? What are some really good things that you would want to do with that? So for sure, with those 3, if you can start talking to your kids about even just the concept of real food. And sometimes I get in trouble with the intuitive eating movement because you don't want to label foods as bad or good. And I'm all for that, as long as it was food that existed more than 100 years ago. Okay. So, let's not pretend that a baby, a kid, a teenager is not going to do better or worse on certain types of things you can buy in the grocery store. Okay. So even just sitting down with kids and saying, hey, you know what, we kind of got off track here. Let's start going with this, and let's make sure that we have protein in every meal and snack, and some healthy fats, butter, avocado, olive oil, and yes, some carbohydrates, some rice, some toast your mom made, whatever. Let's have those at every meal. And even if you don't know exact ratios, you can start getting a feel for, let's do it. I ask kids on that. Let's do a little 4-check thing about an hour after you ate. How's your energy? How's your mental clarity? How's your mood? And are you bloated? Okay. So if a kid goes, oh man, like I got energy to burn, and not the like up on a Red Bull or whatever, but like good energy. And yeah, like I'm actually feeling pretty smart. I have to do my math homework right now, or my moods are pretty balanced, and yeah, I'm not bloated. Then tick, 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 tick. That was probably a good ratio of foods that you had at lunch. And if they're just going like, oh my goodness, I can't even remember my best friend's name, and like I'm just all cranky, hey, that was off. Let's reevaluate that and try shifting. Maybe you'll need a little more fat, maybe a little more protein, and just play around with it by how you feel, because ultimately this is about feeling good and healthy,
Mm-hmm.
So, and like what you can do with the sleep, if you got to, I'm all for master consequences. Okay. Oh, so how did it work? Like reading with the flashlight till 1 a.m. last night. How are you doing today? And nicely tease out some of those kind of things where, yeah, I think I do feel better if I hit the lights out at 9 or whatever,
Right.
So, yeah.
Lots of great things. Wonderful. Well, I have all of your information, and I think I have, did you give me, the imbalance?
Yeah, imbalancelm.com.
.com. Yeah. So I have that. So I'll put it in the show notes.
Okay.
Anything else that we haven't talked about that you think's important to throw in before we sign off for today?
I'm just thinking here. I think the biggest thing about trying to personalize your approach to your family members is that it just takes a load off. Like initially it can feel like, I've had people say to me, you have 5 kids, 2 parents, 5 kids, where you're cooking like 7 different meals every, meal and whatever. I'm like, no, taco salad. And you have more protein, you have more corn chips, you have more beans, you have more whatever, stir fries, whatever. Like, we can do this. Okay. But once you actually get it personalized, it's your life is so much better, because next time someone comes along and says, oh, my buddy at school says I should be doing keto, or somebody says I should be, you can go, well, remember what you know about yourself? Remember we tried getting a lot more fat and you thought you were going to throw up all the time and, didn't feel good. It just makes it so much simpler. Somebody else said this. Someone said I should try becoming vegetarian, or I should whatever. You can just go, what do we use so far? How do you feel best? Why don't we stick with that and you adjust a little bit, but let's not go from A to Z extreme. So I think it lifts a lot of weight off. How to approach different kiddos and teens, bedtime things, calming techniques. Your life becomes, I think, easier. You're not always wondering about everything. So, yeah.
Which is so important. And I love, because it brings self-awareness and mindfulness too, which is so important for a lot of these children, that interoceptive awareness. And life is in the moment, but for building resilience and, everything that I talk about, that's just a side bonus piece as well. So, well, thank you so much. Like I said, I have all of your information in the show notes. Where is the if they want to reach out?
You just lost. I heard you say, where is the what? And you cut out.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can now.
Okay. I don't know. I must have accidentally hit something here.
Okay.
So I was just saying, I have all of your information in the show notes. And so everyone can have access to those things. But for the people who are listening right now, where's the best place for them to reach you?
They can contact me through info@imbalancelm.com. Just pop me an email, and they can also go to the website. There's a couple of free resources on there, a little self-check thing, and just help you understand a little bit more about yourself. So either through email or through the website, there's a contact form on the website as well. Okay.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for being here. Thanks for having me. I really enjoyed chatting with you.